Thank you for joining the October 3rd, 2019 Volta call. Just a reminder to everyone that these meetings are public and recorded, and we post them to the YouTube channel after the meetings. So please keep that in mind during the discussions today and any presentations that we may have. And we have 3 items that are flagged for discussion today, 1826, 1916, and then 1975. This was tagged as part of a discussion on Volta Discuss that was raised up for a topic today as well. So I see Girish, it looks like are you on the audio yet?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Then I believe you'd added the all discuss tag to 1826. So let me go ahead and move over. Let me adjust my screen a little bit so I can see it. Here we go, 1826. Do you want to go ahead and kick off the discussion on this item?
Yeah, sure. There is an ongoing review that Dave has raised. It's about supporting event filtering in Volta Go core. And it looks like it's porting the functionality that was available in Volta 1.x. Volta 1.x had support for event filtering. So it seems like it's a port of that feature. But I believe we had decided that the Volta core acts as an event conduit and not really do anything with the events. So I just wanted to check with the community, ask the community and the operators what they think about this. Is this necessary? Is it a good feature to have? Then let's have it. Else not. So that's all the point I had to make.
Thank you. We have any feedback from the group?
This, I think, sorry, I try not to talk, but Scott, this is related to the work we've done on the PM and the FCAPs for the Volta, right?
Yeah, so on the Monday pod management and Volta FCAPs brigade call, we've talked about event filtering a couple of times, and generally it's been the consensus that we should just push everything and then filter at a higher level rather than filtering within Volta. But certainly we are receptive if there is some operator requirement to filter in the core. It doesn't hurt anyone to filter in the core, but within the brigade we didn't see, we haven't seen the need to do that. We think filtering at a higher level would be the better solution if there was a choice.
But so my question is this something on the Volta core can be turned on, turned off very easily? What I'm saying is, when we do the alarm filtering, it's an individual alarm filter. So would that complicate the whole Volta core, even on the adapter level, or it's just one flag, you can turn it on, turn it off? So Amit, I think this is this the Deutsche Telekom requirement?
So Sean, Deutsche Telekom has some requirements around this, but this one is not coming directly from there. So before we get to that, just wanted to get my understanding correct. Although the JIRA says implement event filtering in the core, it's more about configuration for filtering of events through the core, because the events per se don't travel through the core, so that a filtering could be done there.
Okay, maybe I should. I go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I thought the idea was to do or think about if we need source filtering. So ideally, we should ask ourselves, do we want to do any filtering directly at the device, saying that we don't want to increase the load on the adapters or Volta, And should some kind of filtering be available in the source itself? Yeah, Ken, you had some points, right?
Yeah, so I raised that issue. So let me put some context around it when I raised that. The first thing is like as Girish pointed, the aim was to port whatever we had in 1.x into 2.0. So what did we have in 1.x? Actually, in 1.x it was alarm filtering. So in 2.0 we name everything as event, which is the right way to do things. So there were two levels of filtering that was in 1.x. One, because in 1.x everything was together, like the adapters and the core features. So when we're doing filtering, it was a filtering on, like, we look at the events, we says, okay, we're going to set some configuration that are going to say, okay, for this category or this category or this kind of alarms, we are not going to send it out. That was within the core that was doing that. And the other aspect of that was if there is anything that is required on the adapter level or on the device level. So there was another filtering key there that was targeted for device. This is really for in case a device is behaving a certain way, it's supporting too much events, we want to throttle that. So that's what we had in 1.x. It was really the configuration around it. So in 2.0, we could have something similar in the sense of, like, the core itself is not going to filter events. What it will have a config that it can push to the adapters, and then the adapters which are the one publishing those events can filter out or not. That's the spirit behind it. That Jira.
So from a state management perspective, do the adapters then have to persistently store this configuration, or does the core know if an adapter restarts and repush it? What approach would you be thinking of for that?
The approach would be more like we're trying to get to a model where the adapters are as stateless as possible. So if a adapter restart, then during a reconciliation phase, it will get a list of devices that it needs to look at, and that config also will need to be pushed to the adapters.
But again, right, so in the 2.0, all the events coming up from the OLT side, they go directly from the adapter into the
Kafka, yes.
So the Volta core should not be involved at this point.
No, it won't. Yeah, it won't be involved. This is really about the configuration. If we want to push, literally, it's a configuration that needs to go on the adapter or the device. If we need to push that, it will have to go through the core as an API request. So, is it something that we need, or if we don't need that, then we don't need to implement it.
Is there a specification for how the filters work, and how to write a filter and how to specify what you'd want to get filtered out? I'm looking at the proto file linked in the review, and it seems to have a bunch of parameters, but I'm not sure how one would go about configuring those. Is there documentation for that somewhere? Yeah, if you look at the Volta proto, it gives these config event filter and rules, and I'm trying to figure out how someone would actually configure this.
Yeah, well, typically it would be more like you receive an event and you match that filter. There's different categories there. There's like all those different keys. If anything, all those matches, then you forward them. If not, you discard them.
So is the default to be push everything and exclude what has a rule that says to exclude it, or is the default to be push nothing and only push what is specifically included?
I don't know what was the default in 1.x. But we can make the default the way we want it, right? It could be the default push everything, and then only when there's a config that goes down to say filter those out, then we apply those filters.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's a safer bet, is push everything and then exclude what's specifically excluded.
Yep. I agree on that.
Personally, I think this is a good to have feature, and because you're pushing everything, and someone who wants to filter out, say for example, you have some events bombarding the system, you want to filter them out. This framework doesn't hurt anybody unless you start, I mean, if you want, you could use it.
I think it would be really useful to get a more formal definition of how these filters work and what's the expected behavior. Because if I was tasked with trying to implement this, I wouldn't know if it's a whitelist, a blacklist, if the filter events are given as matching expressions, or if they're literal, like they have to be an exact match. And all those sorts of things, especially if they're going to be implemented in multiple adapters, would need to sort of be done in the same way. Otherwise, you don't want to have different styles of filters for different adapters. That would be just crazy. So getting a spec would be really nice if someone would like to jump on that.
Okay.
Would something like documentation directly in the proto be enough, or should there be different README somewhere?
I think it would be nice to have like an operator-focused doc that says, I want to filter out a message that looks like this. This is what I do. And then that can filter down to whoever is working on actually doing the implementation to make the functionality work the way that the operator expects. So I think we need to start at operator doc level and then work down into implementation level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, fair enough.
So I thought the plan was to basically do any filtering or changing of priority or classification into alarm or event was kind of a higher level function, right? So is this like for debug, or I mean, it seems like it's kind of going to be used by an operator, or I mean, I thought the model was going to be different, I guess.
I think what happened is when some of the Tiger team requirements came down, it became clear that this one might be needed to be closer to the adapter, somewhat counter to what we talked about in Huntsville.
So the modification of the alarm or event or the level of the alarm might be done at a higher level, saying, and then basically just filtering out any fluff that we're not interested in at the lower level, I guess.
I don't think this one is supposed to change the event per se. It's really looking at the events as whether it needs to be blocked or not. Yeah.
So I mean that any changes would happen at the higher level we talked.
Yeah, correct.
Huntsville, right?
Yeah,
but this is basically just a slowing down the number of events that are coming out of the system to the ones that you're interested in, I guess.
Yeah, that's really the intent of this.
So any notion of severity or interpretation or rendering events is certainly northbound. This is just a mechanism to slow down. It sounds like very specifically these discrete set of events from, at a device level, across the pod level. Is there, I guess, going to be criteria to say, which ONUs may or may not be sending these specific events anymore? Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's the idea behind it. And in that case, like one thing that maybe like maybe Zach talked a little bit about it. So maybe we need to have a little bit clearer requirements from the operators of what they would like to see in this kind of filtering, because we have a proto there that is being defined. Maybe it's enough, maybe it's too much, or maybe we need to add things to it.
Yeah, I seem to vaguely remember David having an action item on that. I don't think he's on the call, though, is he?
He's on the call. He's on the call. I'm remembering what the action item was. We wrote up the event stuff, had some event document a while ago. Again, I've always been a fan of filtering in the core, not, populating everything up. The minute you start filtering at the edge, you got to just tell, you have to be very aware who's listening, right? Because you have to know what events to filter, what events not to filter. Where if you pass everything up, kind of a big data approach, then you have an analysis system, do all the work. You have all the data you could ever possibly need. Otherwise, you're going to have to understand what your analysis components are. You don't filter out data that the analysis component needs. As Kent was saying earlier, if this is to prevent flapping type of stuff or flooding from a certain O&U, that's a different issue.
Yeah, I think I look at this as primarily a performance upgrade, in that we're always going to have some layer at the top that's doing filtering and event manipulation and such, and this is only a way to squelch at the bottom because you think that flood of messages is adversely impacting performance. And I do think there's some danger in us, proactively fixing performance problems that may or may not exist, because we don't know the rate of messages that are going to be flowing through. We don't know whether it's a problem. Maybe we don't even need this feature. But on the other hand, I don't think this feature is ever going to hurt anything. So I'm not implementing it. But I agree with the others that it'd be nice to have clearly defined requirement from the top. I hope that makes some sense. It's early in the morning.
So first of all, do we keep this, or is this one, okay, I didn't look at the code, what exactly the code is doing?
Well, I think that was the action was to document the code. I think there's seems to be general agreement that it seems like a useful feature, right? But I guess this is going to move down to the adapters themselves. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, that's the idea. And currently, like Sean, there's no code for it. It needs to be implemented. If we
need to be what?
Implemented. It's not. There's no code there currently in the core for event filtering.
No, but there is
not doing anything today.
There's a Garrett. Yeah. There is a code review required, right?
Yeah, but that's just on the Protos repo, which defines the interfaces, not the operation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Functionality.
Then I think in the design document, when that gets written up, it'd also be helpful to describe, what the persistence approach is. What we just talked about, how it would be if an adapter restarts, it gets pushed down during adapter configuration, just so we clearly know what's going to happen when components fail, and where any of this configuration gets persisted, and what persistent store it goes into, and that sort of thing.
Matt, we talked about this just a few weeks ago, right? So I think my previous question is, I think may not be a bad idea to say, I want this OOT, this box, not to report any events, right? Because it's under maintenance or whatever. in that case, but I remember you were saying, you know, the setting on the adapter can be applied on the individual OLT, not the overall, all the OLT who is being used by this adapter, right?
It could go either way. So the OLT adapter, remember, is just a collection of handlers for each individual device. So given it is it is the collection of instances, if you will, for individuals, it could go to any one individual and say, you are causing me lots of noise, be quiet. Or we could say at the top level, all individuals for this one particular alarm that we just don't care about, silence all of them for that. I could see that both scenarios as being doable and likely. So it's almost just a qualification. If the qualification is alarm, literal alarm specific, and then the qualification is additionally a device like an ID, and then the qualification could additionally be even a port. We could say this alarm on this device on this port, squelch. Or we could just say this alarm and not provide any of the other parameters, and then it would squelch it across all devices and all ports.
Mm-hmm.
The adapter is in a position to do that for both.
So of the fields in that proto, there would be some way to wildcard some of them, or at least say only these filter on these 3 fields and not all 7 or whatever was in that proto. So some way to control
this is where we have to get into wild. You know, let's say, you know, I imagine we want to allow some level of, you know, quote unquote bad configuration to say if I just put in star and then don't define a device or a port, then it would squelch all alarms for everybody. You know, that may not be what you really want, but you know, if we don't bound the wildcarding, then you could end up in that situation. But I think the flexibility needs to be there to do something similar to that.
And where is the state for that held? Is that in NEM or? If I disable a certain set of alarms and I restart, then presumably that would also be preserved, right?
Yeah, so I guess this gets into if via the core northbound interface, the adapters are told to, again, squelch these alarms, is the core going to just remember that like the core remembers flows? And then NEM is just telling the core either to add a flow, add or remove a flow, just like it could tell the core to add a event filter, remove an event filter, right? It might be a little bit of both. I kind of defer to Ken a little bit on how much remembering we'll have the core to do with regards to event filtering, but I could see the model being similar.
Yeah, I think having it remembered somewhat in the core would be useful, because there may be some implementations that are just Voltha with custom northbound, and this would be a useful feature for those operators.
And it may be that the adapter, you know, after being told once, will remember for the lifetime of the adapter runtime. But even again, just like with flows, we have this situation where sometimes the adapter may need to ask the core, tell me everything you know about what I have already, and do some sort of, you know, audit or reconciliation. Event filters could be the same way. It could be, tell me what you've told me already just because I need to double check some things.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like it would be reasonable to me. So NIM would ultimately be the driver for initially setting them, but down the line, different elements, you know, keep track of as much or as little as needed. Obviously, if the adapter didn't have to remember anything at all, it would make the adapter a lot simpler. But you know, there are situations where if adapter restarts, it has to have some way of being told again if it went away and came back.
Right, but as Ken pointed out, adapters are designed to be stateless essentially. So when that comes back up, it's just that communication that you talk about, that resync back to the core.
Yeah. It could be as simple as, and like I said, we talked about this with flows. It could be kind of an ad hoc request for bulk update. It could be an ad hoc request for event filters. You know, whether the adapter stored its own state and is just double checking, or whether the adapter willfully didn't remember anything and is just going to apply it. It's up to the adapter.
Just, you know, and one of the things the adapter does when it starts up is says, give me everything I need to know from the core.
Yeah.
Yeah, and does that complete resync.
So I guess we have a design now. High level.
Julie, can you refresh the page? I tried to write up notes for this. So if other people have stuff to add, let's. I think we've sort of come to a conclusion that this is desirable, and but we need to decide how this works from an operator perspective, and then also where storage and reconciliation works. Does that seem like the consensus?
Yeah.
Yeah, looks good to me.
Okay. Next steps. I think somebody needs to jump on figuring out how the core adapter API interaction would work, and the resync and repush on reconfig, and then to even start the implementation, we need to get that operator level doc worked out. Should we make new tickets for these items, or is there somebody who wants to take this on?
Would that be an extension of the FCAS brigade?
Yeah, we can take it on within the brigade, though we're going to need resources to actually work on it. So I would have to ask Saurabh to assign us someone. I think all of our workers are their plates are filled up at the moment. But I think that's just a matter of me making the request to get somebody. So yeah, if we want to create a JIRA issue to come up with a design for this, and then we can manage that through the Monday meetings, that would be fine.
I think those could be added as subtasks to this task. That way we have them grouped together.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, I'll cut and paste in from the notes into some subtasks, and then turn it over to Scott.
You might want to change the title of the
yes.
issue. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion on this item today? I think we're at a point then where it can be handed off to the brigade, and then Scott, as you mentioned, we need to talk to Saurabh about getting some resource support for this, for that brigade work.
So Julie,
yes.
I have not been in touch with this one. So once this is a new task, is that the Tiger team will need to determine, or the G5 or G6 will need to determine whether this one will be part of the Tiger team scope?
So I think I'll have to check on when the version was added. So if the version was added as of like, I don't know, a week ago, then I believe that would have been assigned by Saurabh. So hold on, let me go into the view and check. We could take a look here. And yeah, so Saurabh did assign this to 2.2, so it is expected for this scope, it looks like. And so then I think Scott's right that we go back and work with Saurabh, and the G5 can go back and work with Saurabh to try and get resources assigned for this. Anyone else have a different view?
Nope, just wanted to see the update.
Yeah, so, and we're in the process of still testing out our new structure for things, so hopefully everything will go smoothly. I think probably we can go ahead and move on to our next item, 1916. Zach, this is what I think you flagged for discussion today. So let me go back to the sorry. Let me get my flags back up here. Probably would have been quicker just to navigate directly to it. So sorry about that delay. 1916. Okay, Zach, I'll hand it over to you for this one.
So there's been a desire to use the Go mod toolset rather than Go dep to maintain the dependencies within our code. There are a couple reasons for this. One of the ones that started it was people were thinking that Go mod is built in, it's sort of the default, and therefore the more the community is going to move to it. That said, we've been running into some issues with that Scott and David and a few other people have run into. So the two main issues that we ran into was that the Go mod tool does strip certain files, specifically some protobuf files that were needed by the API server. And Scott can probably speak better to that than I can. And the other one was that it has a slightly different versioning scheme that it expects on Go or Git repositories. It requires everything to have a version prefixed with a V rather than just the bare version number. And that second one's kind of minor, but it's a little annoying. But the first one creates a sort of an operational problem. And that said, this also brought up that sort of what are we getting out of this migration? And there isn't, and that was called into question as well. So Scott, could you speak anything more to these points?
Yeah, so the first issue had to do with the Volta Protos repository. When we bring that in under dep, we get all of the files in the repo, which include some compiled protobuf artifacts. When you bring it in under mod, mod decides to strip out things that it thinks are not necessary for actually building the code. And then it turns out we actually wanted one of those things to configure the API server. And that is the compiled protobuf for the Volta API. So there are ways around it. So some people have written some third-party tools to copy the stuff into the vendor directory that GoMod didn't copy. I've managed to put together a makefile that uses one of those tools. It's a bit clunky, and the tool probably needs some fixing. It's got a few issues. So it's inconvenient, though I don't know that it's actually a showstopper for us. I think there are ways around it, but it turned out to be an inconvenience. The second one that came up was depending on our own projects. So for example, we might have a simulated OLT repo that needs to depend on Volta Go. And our own projects, we tag them with just a version number. So we tag with 2.1.2, for example. But GoMod needs all tags to start with the letter V. So this entails Zach doing some magic in the build system to get these tags to start with the letter V so that we can depend on those for our own dependencies.
And that said, I don't mind doing that magic, especially if other people want to use mod and want to use our libraries. It's just that's the minor issue. The bigger issue is the major first one, and it's it's just one of these things where we're not sure if is it worth doing this at this time, because it seems like it's turning out to be more work than we expected and with less benefit than we expected, especially if we have to do weird workarounds that require third-party tools again, which is what we're trying to move away from when switching to mod.
So as part of this, now that the language, itself prefers Go mod, it seems, does this mean that dep and the dep maintainers are deprecating dep? Is dep going away?
Actually, so on that point, I've looked at the GitHub for them. They're not going away. They've decided to pursue being different than GoMod for people who want the way they work is supposed to GoMod.
part of me thinks if this much heartache is experienced right now and folks are spending so much time trying to do workarounds, I mean, what are we really getting out of it? Especially if DEP is going to, hang around for a little while. Maybe the Go mod community needs to sort itself out, from the SEMVer point of view and also from the tagging dependencies and copying over files point of view. Let someone else's projects go through the burden of hashing that out, and we can tag along later.
So one way forward would be I fixed the build tools so that they add the V, so we're ready for when we make the transition. We move these stories to future, and then people get to them when they can, when it's not we're not urgently working on getting functionality working. And hopefully at that point there will be better solutions for the issues like the protobuf that Scott mentioned.
So 2 points. One, some things have already moved to mod, and we're gonna have to deal with that. The other one is, are we gonna back out those? The other one is how we're depending on no-go files through dependencies. Is that an improper use of it in some sense, right? Is the Go language spec really meant to say, look, these dependencies are meant to be code dependencies, not resource file dependencies. And the resource file dependencies need to be handled a different way. Again, is it a usage issue?
On that point, even in DEP, to get that PB file to show up, that resource file, you have to specify not to prune the branchable stuff. So DEP doesn't support the other box either. You have to configure it.
So I'm wondering if there is a best practice other than using the don't prune or this other tool to depend on non-code files with Golang. That would be one area of inquiry. I don't know if someone's looked at it or not, but it might be something to look at. Yeah, I mean, it has been harder to move to Go mod than I kind of wish it was, just in general. But if the language is, they're going to build it in, I worry that if we stick with DEP, we start bridging away or forking away from what the language is direction. And I don't know how that's going to affect or the work that's going to, technical debt it's going to require going forward.
Yeah, I kind of don't want to make a decision solely based on this protobuf issue, because I think we can find another way to get that protobuf file where we need it. Either using this third-party tool or just putting our own hack in the make file that is able to obtain it from the right repo. It would be nice if there was a central source of versioning that got both the Go code and the protobuf. And maybe this third-party tool is the solution for that. I do kind of wish we didn't put things in the vendor tree that are not Go code. So I think us adapting to what Golang feels is the best practice may be the right approach there, rather than continuing to rely on that file being in the vendor tree. Ultimately, the immediate future.
Is the idea that we're depending on the protobuf file, not on the generated stubs, right?
Yeah, I think it's a .pb file, so maybe that's a proto set. That's not the raw proto text. I think that's when the compiler compiles it to the kind of the intermediate representation. So it's not Go code, it's not raw spec, it's the in between, and I think we're using that.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like a binary of the proto.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah. No, the cuddles are using that as well. Yeah, I
this
think.
problem,
Go ahead.
but this problem is only when I think we probably decided to go ahead and include vendor directory, right? This problem would probably come if you're not including vendor directory, or there's a change in the protobuf, right? Then we probably have to manually copy it into vendor.
Have we tried that where we don't include it in the vendor directory? And and then just have it download. I mean, I don't really like that solution because if we're unable to get one of these dependencies, then the code can't build. But I don't know. Has that been tried?
Well, I mean, if we're going to download it, doesn't matter where we download it to, right?
Yeah, but I think the point that was trying to be made was that if the download happens as opposed to it being committed in the vendor directory, it will get those additional files.
I thought we agreed not to commit the dependency because that's a bunch of files that we are carrying around for basically.
We actually agreed the other way, that we would commit the dependencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of, after we agreed on this and after I put together a few patches to do this, I do kind of feel like it is a lot of noise in commits, all of these dependencies flowing, but maybe that's the source of another discussion, and we did reach an agreement on it. So personally, I'm fine with sticking with the agreement that we include these, though I am receptive to Mateo's argument that there's a lot of noise to this stuff going in and out of the tree.
Agree. There's a lot of, let's take that off a separate one. I think it'd be interesting, if no one's done it yet, to do a little searching to see if there's a common way people are dealing with importing proto sets from other projects. I don't know if anybody's done that or not.
Yeah, I can take it as an item to continue to look into that. I spent a while looking into what are people doing as workarounds for this Go mod thing, and came up with 2 tools that people have written and sort of not written very well and not maintained to do this. But I can look and see if there is another best practice for obtaining the proto set file. You know, I think one issue is right now we do have this sort of single source of dependency. It's either the go package.toml file or it's the go.mod file that, you know, one place says this is the Volta protos you want to use. If we had to specify that repository in 2 places, then it gets out of sync. So if there's any way we can keep it down to just one place that says what version of that we want to use, that's better than 2. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. So any solution that goes back to the Go mod file is what I would prefer.
Yeah, I think I agree. The non-proto or the non-code resources being managed a different way, it sounds like none of this was intended for that. So, you know, whether it's JPEGs for a web application, somebody has to have, you know, dealt with this, you know, some way or another. The one piece that kind of concerns me, though, is the pinning of versions in the Go mod file. Do we have to have a tagged release? Can we not just say the tip of a branch or of master or even a specific commit?
No, you don't have to have a version release. There is another file that is called GoSum that keeps track of the MD5 hashes of the dependency that you download when you imported it, and it is always going to download that version.
Does that particular file get overwritten if the Go mod file is, you know, either read or used as the source of truth?
Yeah, I believe if you update something in the Go mod file, then the MD5 hash changes in the Go.
And so that's kind of in the same problem with depth. Like if we change the TOML file, or if we change the lock file, but then you go back to the TOML file will overwrite the lock file every time. So yeah, it's really just kind of what flexibility do we have in the mod file in terms of picking versions is the real question.
And we also need to decide what we want to do here, because I think it was discussed in stabilization channel a couple days ago. I think I asked the question and got a couple of responses that people did say they wanted us to only depend on released versions of our own packages. So if we do want to depend on the tip of a branch, then
No.
Well, we need to get that out. We need to settle that now, preferably.
Yeah, I don't think we. I want to say a component should only release or depend on release versions of another component. Else, you get unpredictable results.
What about master on one depending on master on another? And we're not prepared to release master on the other.
I think again, I think it's better if we depend on a official release. I understand the pain around that, or at least understand some of the pain around it.
So the system as designed is to make it as easy as possible to release new versions. So it's much better to release early, release often, and to have new minor versions or patch versions come out on a regular basis that can be depended on, rather than trying to base things on master. And that is a shift in thinking.
Sure. I mean, for 2.1, I think it makes sense because, we already have 2.10, 2.11, 2.12. But with master, master is implied to becoming 2.2, but we haven't released 2.2 yet. So if we want to push a tag for master for folks to depend on that will become 2.2, but we're not ready for 2.2 yet, then what is it?
Well, why wouldn't we be ready for 2.2? Again, if we release
if you're working on
does it matter?
Features in OpenOLT adapter in master and you want to commit those changes and you want to still have the adapter run, but then you also have dependent changes in Volta Go master, but Volta Go master hasn't had the release yet, right? So now you've got OpenOLT master further ahead and it can't find its dependent Go release to include.
Yeah. I think this is the conflict between like Semver versioning and marketing versioning. I think we're thinking too much about we can't release 2.2 because it's not done yet, as opposed to we need to release a 2.2 that can be depended on just from a versioning standpoint. And I don't know what the transition there is, whether like the final 2.2 release actually includes like 2.4 of the core, and that's totally fine. I mean, everybody here, if you're running Chrome, you're running like Chrome 67 or something. So we need to sort of maybe think about breaking that thinking if we're going to be depending on specific versions.
I mean, I'm fine with that. The vanity versions, are very frustrating in that sense. I totally agree. It just means we have to tag it something, and whether we call it 2.2 and we just don't actually say it's a feature complete release yet, then it's just communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we just need to communicate that up to the chain, to the G5 and the Tiger Team people that, if they're telling people that the number 2.2 means something and we release 2.2, that it's not interpreted to mean more than we intended it to mean.
So just as a note, with Go mod, I haven't found a way to get the tip of a branch. You are always getting a commit. So if we decide to go with Go mod, we won't even be able to do master on master, because we'll do master on a specific commit of master.
So where are we?
I think the last decision was I think Scott volunteered to look for a solution and see how other people are finding solutions with including protoset files or maybe other non-Go files like image files, how other people are dealing with that, because we can't be the only ones with this problem, and then regroup. I still am going to do the, there's another ticket in here for tagging, doing versioning with a V in front. That's the blocker in 1996.
Okay.
That I need to do anyway so other people with Go mod things can consume our versioned repos. And then maybe we go on a case by case basis and we convert or not convert. Does that seem reasonable?
Well, I think if Scott can find a solution, then we may just go forward with the conversion. A reasonable solution, then we just do that. Having multiple tools in the repo, I think, is going to come back and bite us later.
Yeah, I agree with David. I think if we can do it, we should just push forward and come up with a consistent solution.
And yeah, then I think we do have to start releasing more often under certain conditions. The different components. Because I think regardless of mod or dep, we don't want to rely on a dependency on a branch head.
So this brings up the question of, do things that are in a master branch, do they end up depending on releases only in a master branch? Or could they depend on releases in Volta 2.0? I mean, say I release a Volta Sim OLT adapter. Right now, that's only in master. It doesn't even have a 2.1 branch for that repo. What should it depend on? Should it depend on Volta Go 2.1 or Volta Go 2.2?
I think it can depend on, well, it depends. Is what you need in 2.2 or only in 2.1?
Let's say either one would satisfy.
Then I think you could call the dependency what you want, to be honest.
I mean, I think right now it's kind of silly because 2.1 and master are basically the same. Or 2.2 and 2.1 right now are basically the same. But there will be a point where 2.2, aka master, will start seeing some fairly significant changes to how flows work for multicast, multi-tcon, and will likely break if you're not ready for it.
Right.
So,
but again, it'll also be that everything in 2.1 should be in 2.2.
Yeah. So it's like if what you need works with 2.1, and you know what you need works in 2.1, good. If what you need currently works in 2.2 works right now, great. But at some point, 2.2 will become something that may likely break you. You know, do you then just go set it back to 2.1? I mean, I guess the idea of backward compatibility would be ideal, but you know, I just know with some of these big changes coming, you know, there's a risk there.
I mean, yeah, I would think outside of 2.1, you want to rely on the master or the 2.2 branch or whatever, right? Not the branch, but the 2.2 release train.
Which means we would have to release a 2.2 to depend on it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to start doing that if our rule is don't rely on the tip of branches.
I will say that we went through the same exact problem while working in XOS, and the moment we decided to not depend on moving target, our life became much, much better, and everything was much, much more stable.
Yeah, and it was very much more obvious when you switched versions if something broke. You knew that there's only one variable changed in the equation, which is your dependency, and then everything that broke was the fault of that. So it just made the debugging process infinitely easier.
The only thing I would say about that, if we're going to name master 2.2, it's a 2.2 that just keep changing, right? It's not the same 2.2 like a day from day 1 to day 2.
It would be 2.2.0 would be the first one. Then anytime you release it, go to 2.2.1, 2.2, blah, 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 right? So you wouldn't just be changing the code behind any given version number. Any time, yeah.
Yeah, so if you don't want to make it official as 2.2.0, you can do 2.2.0-alpha 0, alpha 1, alpha 2, so that it's clear that it's not like stable release version, but it's just a stable version you can depend on for your development.
And how often do we plan to, like, after how many submit? Like, is there any rules around, like?
Based on need, I would think. when someone else needs to depend on a change that's in the code.
So,
yeah, that's exactly how we were doing it previously. And
High Volta has kind of gone through this as well because it's a library, and what ends up happening is you might get one commit in, and then you got a point release, and you might get another commit in, and it might be the next point release. If you know, you can skip a few if you can, but what really ends up happening is we start getting point releases almost every other commit.
Well, that really depends by the content of the commit. But yeah, we had some stretch of time in which we were using one component every time we were doing a commit on XOS2. I mean, our releases are for free.
Okay, makes sense. If we're going to do it that way.
So would we, for now, let's say with Volta Go, leave the branch as master branch, but go ahead and change the SymVer to 2.2.0 and let it issue out the images and the tags, but still leave the branch as master?
that's correct.
Yeah.
And then and then eventually when, let's say we want to do a 2.2 long-term release stability branch or something, or maintenance branch, we might say that 2.2.11 is the start of that, and that's where we create the branch from. And then people can cherry pick back to that and continue the 2.2.12 on that branch, whereas master goes to 2.3 or whatever.
Okay. All right, that's good. I think that's doable. It's just I had envisioned 3 branches to have to sync patches across, and yeah, I don't know if I want to do that. But if master is cranking out the 2.2.x and then we branch later when we're ready to do a stable offshoot, then I think that's doable. I think we can do that. So that would help GoMod out. GoMod would become a little more predictable. And then just finding a way to copy in non-code resources is a better idea anyway. Between those two things, it sounds like just the V on the SymVer is just something stupid. I don't understand why that's a thing. Is there any potential for that to change, having to require the letter V at the beginning of our versions?
From when I was reading, it doesn't sound likely to change. The Go philosophy seems to be if there's multiple ways to do something, pick one and declare it as the law, rather than having.
In this case, the law is V and then SymVer. I guess.
Yes. There's some kind of flamey. If you want the fun read, go read the things linked from 1996.
Okay. So Zach, I guess this is something you can smooth over in automation.
Yes, I'm gonna deal with it in the automation process. If you look at the 1996 ticket, it goes through. What I intend to do is have only in Git have those versions applied. Everything else, the version files don't change. The Docker containers that get generated still have the bare no V versions. And it just does it if it sees that it's a Go, if it sees a Go mod or a Go dep, the files that would create those or are needed by those, it changes the version, and then it strips the version from the tag if it sees it. So it's fiddly work. I want to really get it right because the versions are committed to history. Yeah, I'm going to do this in any case.
All right.
Zach, are we going to double tag the Git repo or just use the V tag?
We'll just use the V tag, and then I'm going to make the script smart, which shouldn't be trouble because there's a lot of boilerplate code that handles that just needs to be done right and copied around.
But Docker containers will not be V-tagged; they'll just be SymVer tagged.
Correct. And that's I actually did a little survey and looked at other people's containers, and they do not have the V in most cases.
So the only place that would get the V then would be just the GitHub, Git tags, and maybe the branches, or just the tags?
Just the tags. The branches we can set arbitrarily.
All right. Sounds like we power through it then.
Okay, so Scott, do you want your action item to be added as a task here or not?
Sure, let's
Okay.
document it. So my action
Okay.
item of go find out what to do about that protobuf file.
Can you refresh the page again, Julie?
You may
I
have
have more
done it
notes.
already. Thank
I have
you.
more notes, and one of them is Scott being tagged.
Got it. Okay. Here it is. See it. Okay. Thank you. All right. Then anything else before, and I should be removing the all discussed tag until we need to regroup on this now. I forgot to do that on the previous one. Okay. Any other last discussion topics here before we move to our last topic for the day?
So one last minor thing that came up on this whole tagging thing was David proposed, I think yesterday, that after we cut a release, say we went to 2.2.0 and master, that we immediately go back to a dev version proactively. So, you know, we would cut 2.2.0 and then immediately switch the version file back to 2.0.1-dev. Do we want to make a decision on whether to require people to do that, or to do it lazily was the other option? But it'd be nice to have it decided and made into law now if we can.
I would do it lazily on projects that don't have a lot of activity, but because sometimes those might go 2.2.1, 2.2.2, and not have a dev in between, like PyVolta was being mentioned by Matt earlier. But for more popular projects like, I don't know, the Volta Go and other, maybe the adapters, those should probably just have a convention that somebody comes along and does that immediately after they release a version.
Jenkins wouldn't let it in anyway, right? If let's say somebody released 2.2.0, it's out there, and then somebody comes along afterwards and commits their first change after it's released, Jenkins will kick it back anyway, saying
correct.
Conflicting tab. So one way or another, it's going to happen.
Yeah, Jenkins won't let this through.
The issue is then you all of a sudden have a patch set changing the version with unrelated. And,
well, a revision to an unpushed patch.
Yeah, and it does make cherry picking harder because then your cherry pick has to be modified for that version bump.
I would say there's
I'm still in favor of moving to -dev automatically, even for all projects, just because then it's one policy everywhere, and it just, I don't know, it just seems like the right thing to do from my perspective.
It seems like there's a difference between if a project is a top level or a dependency. Like what we were talking about, like the protos might get a version bump every commit, but it seems like the difference isn't like the reason it's likely to get that is because it's a dependency. It's not sort of its own project.
And there is some functionality in the CI system to require that only major versions be applied to dependency-based, or things that are depended on, so that you have to go 2.2.0, 2.2.1, and you can't have anything other than those release tags. If people want to do it that way. So that is an option.
So Volta Go, for example, is now both its own thing and it's a dependency, because it's, you know, it's a dependency of API server, of OpenOLT, of SimOLT adapter, all of these things. So it seems to me that it is going to be common for lots of things to be both dependencies and published artifacts.
Well, is it
both dependencies and leaves at the same time in different contexts?
Is it a dependency in that it actually imports Volta Go code? Or is it just a dependency in that it uses?
Yeah, Volta Go has the common directory, for example, and there are things in the adapters that I think use that common code.
tech profile, some resource manager tech profile stuff that is universal to adapters is in there. Some of the etcd or KV store stuff, logging, I think there's logging in there as well. So yeah, all the adapters, all the Go adapters rely on it. I don't want to say heavily, but critically.
Is it time to move it in its all those dependencies, just similar to PyVolta, into its own repo?
We have talked about it. It might be a good time.
I think it's a good idea to get all the library code out. I don't like things being both applications and libraries at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's time to move it, and then when we import something, it will be like it won't be Volta Go. It will be like maybe read write core or something different things. It won't be just a generic like import everything.
So we have existing stories for breaking out components out of the Volta Go repo. Do we need a make Volta core library repo or something like that? And who could take that on?
Yeah, I mean, I can take it on. It's one of those things that'll be a little bit messy because you'll have to do it, and then you're going to have to go around and update every consumer who used that code to use it from the new place. But yeah, I can take that one on.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Can you make a ticket for that?
Yeah, I'll make a ticket and I'll stick it in the wherever the rest of the Volta Go disaggregation stories are housed.
Okay. Any other discussion on this topic? I just want to do a time check. Got about 20 minutes left. Okay, I think we can move on to our third topic for the day. So this was flagged on Volta.Discuss for a topic for today, and it also refers to 1975. So I've got both of those open here. Mahir, I don't know if you want me to go to the discussion, have that up on the screen if that's useful, or if you want me to start with the Jira ticket, or if you have something else you'd like to share. I'll hand this topic over to you.
Discussion threaded better because the task is not directly about the discussions, but the logs in the task and the comments in the task helps to understand the third item. So we are better to talk on the discussion items. So let us start with one by one, so we can discuss each one separately and have some decisions, perhaps. As community, we after the containerization, we talked several times that we should revisit the APIs between the adapters and core and optimize them and decide if they are necessary or not. So these two items, the first two items are about that. And actually we discussed it on Voltha.Discuss for a while. So the first one is about the response to the get device or get child device messages. If you test, I mean, on bring-ups, you can see that there are a lot of get device messages going from adapters to core. But in fact, the adapters need only a few parameters in a device structure, like its status, its serial numbers, and something like that. But the device structure itself is a huge structure. It keeps device information, its ports, its peers of its ports, its flows, and its PM configuration, etc. So each time the adapters query for a device, this huge response is sent via Kafka to the adapters. So in order to, decrease the message size on Kafka, we may change this response of these messages and define a new structure, for example, and put the only desired parameters in it and send it as a response to get child device. Or perhaps, I mean, we may leave the get device and its response as is and define a new message between adapters and core to get this limited information from the core about the device. Or we can go further and break this API in a few tiny APIs like get device serial number, get device status, etc. So this is the first item. So we can, I think we can first decide, discuss on that, then continue with the other ones.
Just a quick question. So the information in the child device is that seems like that should be fairly static, right? I mean, there's not much changing.
Yeah, you're right. So, I mean, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, at one point, I think Shad had proposed essentially caching some response information that comes from the core to the adapter. That, you know, if a request goes out to get the same information, it returns what the cached information. I'm not sure if that was ever implemented or not.
Or that would be the adapter caching values that expected from the core?
Yeah, I think so.
Then how does it know? Would there also be a messaging going on behind the scenes to keep that cache updated or invalidate the cache?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the. I mean, there was a proposal by Shad at one point to do something like that. But I don't think it was ever implemented.
Okay, yeah, unless you're going to keep a synchronization method and a cache clear method, that becomes problematic. gRPC solves this kind of by a depth capability, right? When I do a gRPC query of the proto, I can say what depth do I want to go to, so I can only get the top level. You know, even rather than a separate API, is there a way here to say, look, when I get the data, give me just the top level data, give me 2 levels down or something like that, kind of mimic the gRPC capability, so that we don't end up with a proliferation of method calls or RPC calls?
Or I mean, would the adapter just cache the information? I mean, if it gets information about an ONU that's pretty static, for instance, I mean, presumably something has to happen to cause that to change, right? So some state change in the ONU would invalidate the data, perhaps. But and why does it need to keep getting this static data over and over again?
I think.
Go ahead.
I think there are two aspects of this. I think it's the idea behind it. It's the adapter requesting device, get device or child device. Pretty much is getting a device. Does it really need the entire structure to be sent out, or just part of what it actually needs? So in that sense, if we do just like you were mentioning, David, just the different levels, it may not work well for all the use cases, because if you look at the structure of a device, there's certain thing that is at a high level, and there are other things that are like deeper in the tree, and at times they're not that consistent for what you're trying to look for. So if we know, for example, the adapters require mostly things like the status of a certain status of a device, or a certain attributes, those are the most common one that they are requesting, then it's much easier by just creating an additional API so that they can request that data. So we don't have to bring down the entire device.
Yeah, I think most of the actions we end up being around admin state, offer state, connection status, and like reason.
Yes.
Looking at the protos, it's like there are repeated fields for flows and PM configs, and I know that a fully filled out device with lots of flows and PM configs, it ends up being a pretty sizable response.
Exactly.
I just worry that, I get that. This client needs this data, right? Another client may need another set of data. If we don't figure out how to do this in some more configurable, generic way, whatever you want to call it, then every client may have a different requirement, and you're going to be adding endpoints based on the client. Where if we can say, look, whether you pass a filter the values you want, or filter by level, or filter by some other mechanism, say here's kind of what I want back from you, and allow that to happen. You have this risk of just building out the APIs custom for each different client. If there are some obvious ways to say, no, there's going to be a whole set of clients that want this data, then I get that, and that's fine, adding APIs for that. But I think we want to maybe take it slower.
I understand that, David. I get your point. It's in the sense of like having a generic like get data, get device, and with some filters is definitely good. The only thing is like if we have another client that require different filter, we still need to go and change the filters in order to provide those data. And on the other side also, I'm thinking more like if there are some generic requests that we know for sure those are the ones that the adapters will request most of the time, we might as well just create API for them.
In fact, I mean, as you said, most of the times the adapters request the status of the device, connect, admin, or generally operation status. But there are some places, especially while sending the alarms, it's adapters queries for serial number of the device, but this may be, I mean, cached on the device structures kept on the adapters. And I saw a request for proxy address also. So these three parameters are the requested parameters for the current time.
Yeah, we can have those for a specific use case, and maybe have those APIs, and then have maybe another generic API that if none of those match, then the adapter can say, okay, give me the device, and one of the flag would be things like with flows or without flows. Then you just send down. They don't want flows, then just send the device without flows, and if they want flows, then you get the entire device.
Yeah, I'm kind of picking on like the two that say repeated, or the three. There's repeated, for flows, and then there's repeated for ports, or repeated PM configs. I guess any of the ones that ultimately drill down into something that can really blow up if you have a large system. I could see an OLT adapter easily having thousands of flows, and then all of a sudden now asking for the device is a onerous task.
Yeah, and also alarms. If I have to request a serial number every time I want to generate an alarm, I mean that's going to be an overhead too.
Yes, but it is, as you said at the beginning of the discussion, it's a static data and can be cached on the objects keeping in the adapters, because in the adapters we have, I don't know, like device agent per device or some other objects per device, so we can keep on them with this kind of static data.
Right. I mean, so some things like serial number. I mean, there has to be some substantial fundamental change for that to be modified, right? You have to bring the ONU down. You may even delete it. You have to re-add it. I mean, it's not going to change dynamically.
Yes. And if you change it, as you said, we probably change the structures in the cache.
So something else to consider too. I know just from migrating from 1.x to 2.x, in the 1.x world, it was just an in-memory object call away to get whatever you needed, and you could do it many, many times, and it really didn't matter. When we migrated, we specifically did not optimize in the initial migration just to kind of keep things workable. Given that, there are many cases where a call to the core may be done in the same sequence of execution a number of times, just because that's how it was in 1.x. And in this new world now, it's an expensive call, and you shouldn't need to do that anymore. Going through and removing that, and again, it's maybe you can call it a form of caching, but it's really just remember it for the next 3 lines so you don't have to go get it again. Could help as well.
Yeah.
I do think there are some fundamental fields like the state of the device that end up, serial numbers that end up being, very much the state, I guess, being the big one to me. It's like there's always this situation where I need to check with the core before I go any further. Is the admin state still good? Is the admin state changed? And there's a lot of checking of that as you go through.
Yeah, I mean, but like off the state, for instance, I mean, that is owned by the adapter, right? I mean, the upper state changes from the things happening at the adapter. So the core would have to go and get that upper state from the adapter itself, right? The admin state, obviously, that's provisioning, so that comes.
A lot of times, the upper state ends up being pushed. So the sequence could end up being there's some OMCI event that happens. Code is invoked, and it says, oh, I need to go get the device from the core just so I'm working with something current. Change the upper state to down, and then update the core. And in that time, it's only one field that we're really interested in, but in reality, we just pulled down all the flows and the PM configs, even though we didn't have any need to do any of that.
So I don't think there's a question that, yeah, being able to limit the data that you pull down from the core to what you need makes sense. And if there are some common patterns we see between clients, create a new endpoint for it. I do think there would, and maybe we wait on need for this, but there probably is a way to say, much like gRPC, whether it's a level filter or some other filter, to say, hey, give me a set of data I want back. On admin state, is the core sending an event to the adapters when the admin state changes, rather than always expect the adapter to query? It seems to me that
the adapter needs to query. There's no callbacks into the adapters whenever something change in the core. Like typically, like indirectly, like if there's an action that is being done in the core, for example, like an operator comes and change certain state, an admin state, very often this is related to another action that needs to happen. And typically those action goes to the adapters. But if somebody come, like an adapter comes, for example, a VOLTHA adapter comes in and change its operational status to something else, and that information is not communicated to all their child devices.
Right, but any state information, I mean, config information would, I assume, would need to be pushed down to the adapter from the core, wouldn't it? If I change the configuration or something.
All the changes so far, the changes that we have seen so far are things that are part of an action that will, in any case, require a request to be sent to the adapters. So if we want it to be another way of, like, every time we have state changes of devices in the core and we need to send a call back to adapters, it can be done. But in most cases, for example, when we are talking about operational state and connection state, those actions already came from the adapters.
But
So
admin state would come from the management system, right? From them, I guess.
Yeah, for example, if we change an admin state, for example, we go from, I don't know, enable to disable, right? That's part of an action by the operator to disable a device, meaning there will be a request to disable the device to the adapter, right? It's like for each one of those state transition for admin, typically there's an action that needs to be done on an adapter.
So like take an enable or disable, right? So on a re-enable from the core to the adapter, it sends the device. As soon as the adapter gets the re-enable or the disable, it immediately turns around, contacts its, either OMCI or BAL, makes some change, and then turns around almost within, 2 lines to tell the core that the operational state is now reflected or changed or different, right? So back to back, that same device and all of its stuff just got passed around twice, just for top-down admin state and then bottom-up operational state to follow along.
Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, for some reason that might not reach whatever it's targeted to reach, right? So it may fail.
And I'm saying it's fine, other than the fact that, in this particular case, we're not needing to go through every bit of the device object that's passed back and forth. It's just the pieces we need.
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And we've got just 1 minute left, so I don't think we're going to be able to cover everything today, unfortunately. Is there some work that we can continue on Voltha.Discuss and then schedule follow-up or continuation to cover the rest of this on Tuesday after reviewing brigade status?
Sure, maybe.
Okay. Because I think we have the test automation brigade starting in 1 minute, so I figure I shouldn't run over today. So apologies, we ran out of time. I'd invite people to continue asking questions on Voltha.Discuss, and then I'll add this to the top of the agenda for the deep dive discussion. I'm hoping we can have some time on Tuesday for that after we do status updates and any non-brigade new JIRA.
Okay, sure.
Okay, sorry, Mahir. And I think I'd better go ahead and close the bridge then. Any last comments before we adjourn today? Okay, thanks everyone, and we'll add this to the agenda for continued discussion on Tuesday then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.